All right, well, I am happy to introduce our speakers for this evening. Niyati Parekh, who is an associate professor, public health nutrition, College of Global Public Health, and she is also in the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies at NYU Steinhardt, Department of Population Health at NYU Langone School of Medicine. That is a mouthful. She does a lot of stuff here. And also with us tonight we have Sandy Merzin, who is an adjunct instructor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Studies at NYU Steinhardt. And this is her second time coming back, and she's wonderful, so we're very excited to have both of them. So I'm turning over the program to them now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for coming.
Okay, so this is a map I think most of you have seen. Are you okay? Can you hear me? No? Okay, great. This is a map you've probably seen a million times, but I guess I'm allowed to use it because every time I see it, it shocks me. Today's lecture, as you know, is about the obesity epidemic, and it's really, when you look at the numbers, it's really frightening to know that 72 million adults are either obese or overweight. 34% are obese and almost 33% overweight. And 6% are morbidly overweight, okay? But that's not even scary to me. 50% of all American men will be obese, not overweight, by 2030. And almost 50% of women will be obese by 2030. So that's huge. And 63% of adults will be overweight or obese. And these are just some numbers, and I don't want to go on and on. But the magnitude is definitely scary. So I also want to point out that this is a drain on our insurance and system and medical expenses and people with diabetes. And do you know that most people who are obese at some point will get diabetes or at least pre-diabetic, and the medical expenses for people with diabetes is going to be much higher. So what is obesity? Can someone tell me what it means to you? And what about that? Okay, that's what when someone looks fat, but actually what does it mean to the body? What is going on in the body? Okay, that's again just that you're heavier, but inside the body, what is it doing? So I thought I would bring to your attention some just some pathways and mechanisms, and how exactly is obesity related to chronic diseases and even cancer and cancer recurrence and such. So I think it's important to understand a little bit of what is obesity, besides for when you see a person or a person looking heavy. Okay? Yes?
Isn't that when you're 20% over your weight?
That's right, but what does this weight and fat inside the body actually do? Is the fat just sitting around, or is it actually doing something? If it's easier for you to not wring your neck around, maybe if you want to sit on that side, it might be easier. Yes, please.
No, the arthritis is better this way.
Oh, okay, sorry. All right, so there's a lot of new science and new theories that are very intriguing, even for someone like me who's reading about obesity for the past 20 or 25 years. I think it's becoming more and more known that the programming for whether or not a person would be obese is actually starting in the womb. So the 9 months really shape up the child, and therefore the young and older adulthood life. And I think there was a lot of speculation, and they were only able to really see this in animals, but now there's a possibility of studying in humans just because of the way research is being conducted, and they've actually come up with a lot of mechanisms. In fact, there's many other factors. It's not only the mother's nutrition or the mother's weight status that will influence the child inside the body. That's confirmed. But beyond that, it's even the birth weight of the child and the mode of delivery. So those who were born by C-section versus born by normal delivery have a higher risk of being obese later in life. Anyone knows why? Why? Yes. Gonna go in there. I'm coming. I'm actually coming back to it. But this was a natural experiment that was done in the Dutch famine. There were a lot of babies that were born premature or small. What do you think? Do you think that they would be more obese later in life, or do you think that they would be underweight and? Okay, the answer is that there's a catch-up growth mechanism that really programs the fat cells to receive extra fat, and they end up actually being obese or overweight later in life. So this natural Dutch famine experiment really accidentally kind of uncovered something that was going on, because when they followed up these children who were exposed to the Dutch famine, they realized that it was actually quite counterintuitive. Okay. So coming back to how do the first 9 months shape your life? If the mother has diabetes or insulin resistance, then babies are born bigger and they have a much higher risk of obesity later in life. There could be stress, infection, a lot of endocrine disruptors are chemicals that mess around with your hormones, and I'm going to come to that in the later part of my talk. Some of this is plastics and some of this is certain drugs, and if they mess with the hormone pathways, then it could also contribute to obesity. Definitely excessive weight gain, or if the mother is obese while she is pregnant and carrying the baby, that could program the child, and there's a higher likelihood of being obese. And maternal diet, okay, I think it's really not true that you should eat for 2 people. And those who do that might wind up with excess weight gain and programming that child again for obesity. So the reason I say programming the child over and over again is because obesity is, it's a consequence of many, many factors. So what the child experiences in the womb is only one one set of risk factors, if I may say so. But we also know that obesity is something that, it has a strong genetic component. So the DNA sequence remains the same, but there are the way the DNA, or the way the genes express can differ, even if twins have exactly the same DNA sequence or genes. But if one twin is physically active, if one twin eats properly, if one twin, has certain environmental characteristics that are favorable, then the genes will express differently as compared to the other twin. So although there is a strong genetic risk factor, which takes away your personal responsibility from being obese or not, I think there's also a very strong environmental factor. So you're programmed a certain way, and then I guess a lot of it is in your hands, and some of it is not. So I'm going to sift through some of those in explaining what obesity really is and then what it does. So obesity is influenced by the location of adipose tissue. I'm sure that you've heard that adipose tissue around the internal organs or in the stomach area does a lot more damage. Dietary intake, if you have refined sugars and refined like white flour, refined carbohydrates of other types beyond sugar, is actually going to get converted to fat and probably be deposited in parts where your body is programmed. So again, scientists are trying to understand, why is it that some people have larger hips and some people have bigger abdomens? Because there is a tendency in different individuals to accumulate fat in different areas. Okay. The big thing I want to talk to you about, which is very new, is the microbes, the bugs in your, or the bacteria that make the natural flora in your body, that are found in the gut, that are found in the oral cavity, that are found all over your gut and your skin and your nasal passages. This makes your body microbiome or microflora. So evidence has shown, right here at NYU, we have experts who talk about this actually, that children who are born by C-section have a completely different profile of microflora and microbiome as compared to children who are exposed to their mother's microbiome when they're born vaginally. And the one C-sections, when they come out, I mean, the first time they take a breath is when they fill up air, and is when they have microbiomes entering their body, and the characteristics are quite different in those who are born vaginally versus C-section. And so what's the big deal? Because these microflora and the microbiome actually are actively, I mean, it's a team of workers inside your body, and they influence your lipid levels, the insulin levels over time. And I think that the experiment has been very successfully done in animals and even some monkeys and primates, only to show that when the animals chew their food and give it to their little babies, they get the same microbiome. But now I think there's a big question about, is the microbiome the same in people who are breastfed versus not breastfed? Is it the same when they're delivered differently? Is it the same in people who've taken antibiotics? Because that revolutionized the medical field, but the antibiotics really killed a lot of the microflora that are supposed to be there. So nutritionists believe that diet has and the change of dietary patterns over time have influenced the microbiome. The medical field knows the antibiotics have changed the microbiome, and I think a lot of studies remain to be seen, but the microbiome it also influences your metabolic profile, your HDL, LDL, insulin, all of these biomarkers. Does that sound okay? All right. So what does really all this fat do? Is it just sitting around, passively sitting around? No, it's not passively sitting around. It first of all, some fat sits around, that's in your abdominal area, is actually known to be more detrimental than fat in other areas. So when I say it's more detrimental, what does it mean? First of all, in general, obesity or overweight, but especially obesity, is associated with, I don't expect you to read all these words, but you can just see so many diseases later in life, okay? It includes pancreatitis, many types of cancers, dyslipidemia, fatty liver, gallbladder disease, and all of these. Now, this is a store of fat cells, and this is what happens. Again, I don't expect you to read the words, but I just want you to see the arrows. This is, in the minimum, we know of about 50 chemicals that are released actively by the fat cell. The fat cell is pushing these out into your bloodstream, and from your blood it reaches so many organs, and this is actually they're called adipokines, but they're chemicals that increase inflammation in your body. They increase blood flow. They help cancer cells thrive, and so on and so forth. So really, the whole the new word that has been used, and it's not really that new, it's more than a decade or so, that fat cells are endocrine organs because they are actively pushing out so many substances. Okay, so this is really what I've been doing for the past 15 years of my life, I guess more in the last 10 years, is to look at the continuum of chronic diseases. Most people who are obese will then have diabetes, not all, but a lot. Pre-diabetes and then diabetes. And these are shared risk factors for heart disease. And all of these have risk factors, shared risk factors for cancer. So there's a very strong link between obesity and cancer that has been described by the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute for Cancer Research. These are big research institutes that really rigorously look at the evidence and compile expert reports, and they've actually said that there's a causal link between some cancers, the most commonly diagnosed cancers, and obesity. So one way to prevent the rate of cancers is to maintain a healthy body weight. And another way to prevent secondary cancer, which is cancer recurrence, is also to pay attention to body weight. Okay, I'm going to skim through these, but basically it's just more examples of the different diseases that are associated with obesity. This is just from the cancer report, the expert panel report that talks about the increase of bowel, breast, gallbladder, kidney, liver, esophageal, ovarian, pancreatic, prostate, stomach, and endometrial cancer with excess obesity. And a lot of these resources can be found online and meant for educating the general public. Okay. So I try to tease out the risk factors of obesity into biological, which we've discussed a few. We've discussed the microbiome, we've discussed the gene, we've discussed all the things that can influence the expression of the gene. But then there are other aspects, which is psychological, okay? A person's chance of becoming obese is greater than 40% if he or she has an obese sibling or he or she has an obese partner. And the social aspect is also very important. Actually, the education level, ethnicity, socioeconomic status are regularly and consistently associated with obesity. And none of these, again, are biologic factors. And this is an excellent study. Do you see it's like a web? It's a study in the Framingham Heart Study population that shows, for a lack of a better word and the best way to put it, that fat people have fat friends. That's how they hang out, that's how they eat, that's how they, it's a social factor, okay? So when we know that there is so many different levels at which we can intervene, do you know what we can do now that you know that there's so many different layers and complications? Can you give me some suggestions of what you think you can do as an individual, and then going into the bigger picture where if you don't want to take responsibility for it, then there are some policies in place. So again, there's a layer of different things we can do to stop this obesity epidemic and from the rates increasing.
Diet change?
Diet change? That's what you would do personally. Education? That's an excellent idea. Anything else?
Penalty on insurance for each pound over.
Oh, yeah. That I don't know how feasible that is, but yes, I think that's a great idea.
Smokers have paid a penalty,
Right.
so why shouldn't obese people?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Regular exercise?
Regular exercise.
Counting calories, know what you're putting into your mouth, what's there, how it will benefit or harm you.
Okay, but I think education is key because a lot of people don't even know what a calorie is. And I'm going to come to it a little bit later, but it actually went the other way around. People thought, if I'm buying 200 calories for $1 versus 800 calories for $1, why would I not buy 800? Because people didn't understand exactly what a calorie was. It came down to the money.
Do you need 800 or are you going to be wearing some of it the rest of your life?
But because you know that.
I
Okay.
have a question about
Sure.
fat.
Uh-huh.
I know that we all have different amounts of brown fat cells and white fat. Some protect the organs and the other is from gluttony, let's put it that way.
Okay.
And they shrink and expand all the time because of what we're using. But how do you control one against the other?
So brown fat is usually in younger ages. I think a lot of it is, what we have is almost always white fat. There's very small amount of brown fat. It's not like you can suddenly increase the stores of brown fat because I don't think that's
Set
biologically.
at birth and then it just expands. And
Yes, it actually almost starts to disappear and get replaced with
the bad.
with the Y. Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Fat is not bad. It's been given a bad name. I think it's important to realize that if you had zero fat in your diet, you would not be able to survive over time. I think it's excess fat that's bad, and it's the wrong type of fat in your diet that's bad. But fat is not bad. So nor is a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates have been given a really bad name. Sugars are bad, but carbohydrates are required. Your brain requires carbohydrate very, very, and at every second. Right now I'm able to speak and think because I'm getting a supply of carbohydrate. But which carbohydrate do you eat? That's the question. So that's a great point you brought up, actually.
When you say carbohydrates, can you specifically tell what kind of food you're talking about?
Right. Actually, I think I have some pictures, so you might be able to understand a little better. And if I don't, then I'll stop and I'll clarify that with you. But these are really, really good points, and I'm going to address it.
Can you tell me
Okay.
a few, what are white fats and brown fat?
Brown fat is more metabolically active and is usually not associated with obesity because we just have small amounts. White fat is less metabolically active, and it's called brown and white. And I don't want to get into biochemistry because of the structure of the fat, because of the number of mitochondria. So
Is the type of fat we eat?
no, it's the type of fat which is formed in your body.
Oh, okay.
And it's gone. It's usually there in children. I'll even go a step further since I've got so many questions. Because children cannot control temperature very well, and the brown fat is supposed to generate heat. So it's kind of like a stopgap arrangement until the children can regulate their body temperature. So that's why it's really not a big issue in adults. Okay. I mean, it's not there in adults too much. So I also want to talk about another factor which is not genetic, and that's sugar sweetened beverages, SSB. There's been a lot of studies by many researchers, particularly a very big meta-analysis, which is, accumulation of several studies done by the Harvard Research Group to find that there was a very large increase in sugar sweetened beverage consumption. It says that increased by 500%, okay, and is definitely associated with increased risk of childhood obesity. Okay, so again, the child is already developing excess obesity, and now this is going to carry on for a long period in life. And what the literature is teaching us now is that if you have any form of cancer, for example, at age 50 or 60, you can't think it's something you did wrong in the last 5 years. There are many, many factors that may have built up towards it, including your childhood weight, your early childhood experiences, I just explained everything, birth-related risk factors, etc. So what about juice? If I'm telling you sugar-sweetened beverages are no good, what about juice?
It's no good too. Fruit juice.
Excellent. So the whole juicing culture, the entire juicing is a marketing gimmick. It's a liquid calorie, and a liquid calories coming from liquids, basically, will not give your brain the same message about that I'm not hungry anymore. Liquid calorie, you can drink a lot more of your calories before your brain says, stop, I've had enough. So that's one aspect of juices. But the other aspect of juice is that it removes all the fiber, and what remains is a pretty sugary liquid, which eventually will increase your insulin levels. And even I just really want you to know this, that even if you can normalize your blood glucose and feel happy about it, glucose is something that goes up and down. It's the insulin that's very, very important, that needs to remain within a normal limit, because it's the insulin that's the culprit. The insulin is like a security guard. If there is more insulin, it will welcome fat that you have had in your diet to enter the cells and to increase weight. So insulin is a hormone that responds to your dietary sugars. And so when you have juice or when you have something, your insulin goes up, and it says, oh, come. It basically fills up the fat cells even more, and it allows cancer cells to grow, because it just helps everything to grow. It's a growth hormone of some sort. Okay. So, yes, a lot of people get excited when they see something like this because it has a big picture of a pomegranate and some berries. But if you really go close and read the labels, it'll tell you how much pomegranate there is. This product has 0.3% pomegranate juice, but it has a picture which takes up pretty much the front of the bottle. So you have to be very careful, and that's where education comes into play. It's one thing to say, don't have sugary drinks, but if you don't understand, or if you can't read, because some of these labels are really difficult to interpret, and nobody expects that you would have a calculator when you go shopping, and that's why there's a flaw with the way things are labeled. Okay. This is another marketing gimmick where they've said, oh, no high fructose corn syrup, just a little bit of agave, the good sugar. Well, the body says, I don't care. Sugar is sugar is sugar. Because it's a marketing gimmick and they repackage all these products to make it exciting. Kale was the recent rage, right? Or it still is. Eat spinach, it's fine. It's the same thing. It's as good, it's as nutritious. I'm not saying kale is bad, but there is no need to, go with all these marketing strategies. Either something is good or it's not good. It doesn't suddenly become good because it's been marketed recently. Okay?
Why you didn't add it in?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry?
Juice,
Yes?
natural juice, organic juice have sugar, but it's not added sugar.
Well, a lot of these may not have added sugar, but they just remove a lot of components that eventually, yeah.
That I got.
Yes. Okay.
So you're saying we should never have orange juice?
If it's orange juice that's freshly squeezed when nothing is taken out, I would say we have to balance the good versus the less good versus the really bad. So if you've, as an example, been having 2 sodas a day, I would say, yeah, please try orange juice for now. And then we'll move you towards something. Actually, that's Sandy's going to show you some great examples of what kind of beverages substitute sugar-sweetened drinks. But it's a matter of choosing from on a scale from good to bad, what's better and what's worse. So orange juice is not as bad as sugar-sweetened beverages like sodas, but they're certainly not as good as eating a whole orange. Because the whole orange has the entire package intact with fiber and everything. Okay. So I think here is something you have to sort of, as long as you're aware in your brain that this is what you're drinking or eating, I think you'll just keep the balance, but you have to be aware of it. Okay, it's hard to say don't ever have juice because that's not going to happen. Okay, so this is just a picture of an American day. I guess a day of beverages. You have a fruit drink, a sweet tea, a beer, a soda, a mocha, and orange juice. All of this really adds up, and you really think you've only had something to drink. It doesn't fill you up, but it could be the same number of calories, and it actually adds up to a lot. And I don't think I want to say this in a negative way, but when I first moved from my country to the US, I was just shocked at how people always had a glass and were drinking something. And I actually started doing that also at some point. When it's winter, you need a coffee. Water is great. Okay? So anyway, so I've said rethink your drink. I've put that here because you can see how much sugar is in each drink over there. And with each of the sugar cubes, you can see how much sugar is really in each bottle. And when it's dissolved, you don't quite have the same perspective. So what do you think of sugary, like sweetened yogurts and sweetened milk?
Natural, or you mean added to it?
Like a sweetened milk.
You said sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar.
Okay, so what do you think? Is it healthy?
No.
Can I tell my child or my adult, anybody actually, no, you can't have a soda, but go ahead and have this chocolate milk which has the equal number
Oh,
of...
you mean adding something to it?
Well, sweetened milk, I guess, would be flavored, right?
Oh, no, I didn't know what you meant, because I was thinking of the lactose in the milk.
Right. I'm saying like actually sweetened milk, right? Okay. What about coffee, tea? Do you consider them sugar-sweetened beverages if you add sugar to it? Yes. So now the word which I don't like to use is sodas or sugar-sweetened beverages. It could just be sugary drinks, because if I say sugar-sweetened beverages, that won't include juices, to your point. But sugary drinks are everything that has more sugar than yes. Okay, so sugary drinks will include frappuccinos. Even though it's a drink, it could be 800 or 900 calories. It would include sweetened milk, chocolate milk, sweetened yogurt as well. Okay. So this is data. I'm very data driven. I'm an epidemiologist. I just want you to look at the blue line and the orange line. That's enough for you. It just shows that the intake of added sugars is too high as compared to the blue line, which is, I really can't say it's supposed to be. It's a very political situation, because you can't say please have at least like 10 grams of sugar. They don't want to tell you what's okay. But this is the average, or they're hoping that it could be less than 10% or about 5% of your daily intake, let me put it that way. But the sugar intake is too high. And the recommendations are to try to strive to keep it to less than 10%, which is certainly not happening. This is, to your point, watch what you eat. Well, as dietitians, we've been trained to do something called plate makeovers, and I hope that you've been able to connect with a nutritionist to show you how to do that. If you like potatoes, use them. I'm not saying no, but don't fry them and make French fries. Let's think of an alternative recipe that would actually reduce the number of calories. So when people actually do these types of plate makeovers, they're really shocked that they could have a wonderful, perfectly tasty, colorful variety of foods even, but that are sometimes half the number of calories. So this is a very nice strategy to try to think of, okay, I really want a sandwich. Okay, do you really need 4 slices of cheese? Maybe let's think about something else. If you want potatoes, can you have a baked potato with the skin instead of French fries? So there are ways to use the same ingredient, and that's where someone like Sandy really turns this around for people who want to learn how to cook and use foods. Okay. And then again, the blue is what you're supposed to eat, but we've shown that no matter how much money the government has spent, no matter how many efforts they have made to increase fruit and vegetable intake, we're still falling short. It's just something we've not really been able to budge overall as a population. I also want to say that there's been efforts in school food intake, but it's really interesting because they've passed laws to offer certain types of foods in a school setting. Does that mean the child is taking it on their tray? Maybe. Maybe if someone serves it to them. Does it mean they're eating it? No. There's a really big new field on waste. I mean, how can you say that this policy is working until you evaluate the waste? Okay. So we don't really know if it's working, but the bottom line is these consumption data may even be higher because we're not necessarily looking at waste. Yeah.
Would you say accessibility also plays a role?
It does.
It's easier to grab the candy because that's everywhere, or the cigarette is all around you, but to get a fresh piece of fruit or vegetable, it's not that easy.
Absolutely. Yes, you really hit an important policy implication, I guess, to increase, the food environment. So this is the same story with whole grains, where we're having much lesser, and people didn't even know exactly what whole grains means, and the labeling around whole grains was messed up, because if it had 5 ingredients with one of them having whole grains but the other 4 ingredients were not, it could still be called whole grains. So here you sort of took the this is the punchline of this slide. It's easier to buy foods. They're all over, these junk snack foods, and it's if you spend $3, you'll hardly get 3 calories, versus if you spend $3 and buy the things in the picture below, you'll get almost 1,800 calories. Plus, you have to hunt hard for this fresh produce. If you go to certain areas of a very segregated New York City, you'll see that fresh produce is sometimes rotten. People don't want to always store it because it's not a fast-moving item. So one of my doctoral students came up with this theory of diet variety and obesity. What happens when you go for a buffet? I want to try this, I want to try this, I want to try this. So that's another thing. The US in general has, a lot of variety of foods, but in a global setting, in an international setting, you really want them to increase diet variety, because they would otherwise, a lot of the population in the lower socioeconomic status would only have one staple food. But in the US, we want them to have diet variety, but within healthy groups. So there was an excellent experiment done where there were brown M&Ms and colorful M&Ms put there. And even though they taste exactly the same, people tend to have one of each color of the M&Ms from the colorful bowl. Is that diet variety? Yes. For example, if you take one candy, which is M&Ms, another one, which is something else, yeah, you've had a variety of candy, but of zero, the healthfulness factor is zero. So that's not the kind of diet variety we want to make what should I say, a policy about. So some of this language which was used in the diet guidelines was confusing to people because they're like, oh, yeah, I'm having a varied diet, but it was banana chips, potato chips, candy, and blah blah. So there's a lot of variety if you think about it that way, where each product is a different product in our grocery stores, and that's caused a little bit of the obesity problem too. Portion sizes, I don't think I need to say more. A lot of you probably have seen the portion sizes grow and bloat and expand. So I just want to try to finish up so I don't take too much of Sandy's time. Is there 3 promising interventions at the policy level. Actually, after this, I have one special thing that I also want to talk about, which is the endocrine disrupting agents. So this is not the last, sorry. But the menu calorie labeling, soda taxes, and also probably putting taxes on other competitive foods. Quickly going to go through these. Okay. When they did a survey on people, do you read the calories? What does it mean to you? Do you purchase fewer calories? The answer was really mixed. If it's someone who was inflicted with a disease, if the doctor had given them ultimatums, if it was a nutritionist or a health professional, not even all health professionals, maybe. But there were others that actually bought more because they had no idea what a calorie was and what it could do. So that really opened the eyes of policymakers to do a lot of education along with the policy. So you can't launch a policy without really educating people. A lot of people just said they didn't have the time, they didn't notice it. Bottom line is it didn't work. And it was not there in all chains. A lot of people didn't even know exactly what they ate. Some of them cooked, some of them didn't. Sometimes they bought it from a chain, sometimes they didn't. And not everybody has to list their calories. So it's a really tricky one. If you only, if you don't eat at a McDonald's and some of the chains that are supposed to have calorie information, then you don't know what calories you said you ate. So this is a mixed bag. I think it's a great first effort and has many problems with it. And I'm not entirely sure that it's worked. They did the evaluation of this policy in many places and have it's a great idea. It was successfully done, but they don't know that it's really worked. Okay, calorie range 900 to, what does this mean? So again, it's kind of confusing. This is just a menu showing all the different calories. Again, it depends on, there's many, where did they get this information from? How much did you waste? It's just not easy to actually use this information. So this is the last part. I want to ask you, what is processed food? And this is a very debatable question whether we should have processed food or not. Yeah.
Something natural that man has altered or changed.
Okay, so do you think that's good or bad?
Bad.
It's bad, but on one hand, so this is a topic that can be debated forever because on one hand, it has provided many opportunities. It has provided longer storage. It has provided, the food industry, as you know, has boomed. But on the other hand, it has also been related to unhealthy food and unhealthy, the increase in chronic diseases, okay? So there are many levels of processing. There's minimally processed food. There's, unprocessed food, which is your whole apple. Then there's minimally processed food or moderately processed food, and then ultra processed food. Okay, so this really, I like this example because an apple is an apple. An apple sauce is processed, certainly not as good as an apple. But Pop-Tarts and apple gummy bears should not even be called apple. And if it gets counted because of what its name is as a fruit group, then there's a huge problem. So is an apple gummy bear an apple? But yeah, you have these apple fruit snacks, right? But if you actually open the packet of that fruit snack, it looks like gummy bears, but it's different worms and different shapes, but it's really nothing close to what it's intended to be. So here is another example of unprocessed, moderately processed, and ultra-processed. There's a very big difference nutritionally and what it means to your body between the first and the third. Okay, so we really live in a world of processed food, and this actually really took me by surprise. Now you have a drinkable Coke ad where you can, this was I think in Atlanta, where you can push and get samples. Okay, so why am I talking about processed food? What does it have to do with cancer? What does it have to do with obesity? This is another interesting thing. I've put this picture here because most people will say, I should just leave New York City and go to Woodstock. Sorry, it's too late. It's in the environment, it's in the water, it's in the ecosystem, it's everywhere. There's not much we can do because man is almost too toxic for his or her own good, and that's what it's come to. So you have whales and birds and people who don't creatures who don't live in New York City who are also feeling the effect of some of these endocrine disrupting agents. What are endocrine disrupting agents? Okay, sorry. A very good example is BPA, because you've all heard of that, but there are many other agents. BPA is typically found in plastic. They've replaced it with something else, and I can't remember the name. I think it's BP something else, bisphenol something else, BPS, I think. Do we know anything about BPS? No. Could it do the same thing as BPA? Potentially, but not sure. But because we don't know, right now it's safer. And what does this do? It can actually bind to some of the hormone receptors and block the way your normal hormonal system should work. And it could mess the hormones up. And there are many hormones that support your body being obese. There's a problem with many girls getting early puberty because of the exposure to plastics and plastic containers. Your cheese is wrapped in plastic. It's not just how it's processed, but it's also how it's wrapped, how it's stored, how it's sold. You have cans that are lined with all these chemicals. You have, you just can't get away from plastic. You just can't. I think if I were to draw a plastic clock instead of the clock that shows the drinks, I think it would be like every minute, everything. Your toothbrush is plastic, what can you do? Okay. So what you could do, if you can, is to have some things that are organic, which I'm going to talk about here. It's called the Dirty Dozen cheat sheet. There's some foods that are low pesticide foods, and so if you have to really decide where your money should be spent, then at least buy the Dirty Dozen. That seems to have a lot more pesticide residues. So now you have the packaged foods, but now you also have commercial industrial chemicals coming through the food system because of the way they are grown and manufactured and all that, right? So this is a very useful list, I thought, for the Dirty Dozen, but for chemicals. That means shampoos, toothpastes, all those hairsprays, all of this. These are the chemicals you should look for that shouldn't be present in your food or any products that you use, because they mess up your hormones. And while early puberty is debated, they're thinking it's the diet, they're thinking it's the hormones, and they're thinking it's some of these endocrine disrupting agents. I think it's a little bit of all. And early puberty, the age of puberty has been falling, has also been associated with cancers in later life. The earlier there's hormonal exposure, the higher the chance, especially for female cancers. And then I think somebody brought up physical activity. I have to talk about sitting time. Okay, do what you can to remain physically active. Think about it. You're in New York City. It's a wonderful opportunity to walk and be active. Because if you exercise for 1 hour a day only and sit down for the rest of the day, are you really active? Constantly think about it. Try to, get off a few floors before your, two floors before the one you have to go to, or try to walk a little extra to the subway, just go for a walk, try to think about it all the time. So I'm saying there's one thing to feel completely responsible for your own condition. I think we're also trapped in an environment which we can't do too much about. So within this environment, what is it that we can actually do to change our behaviors, which could, contribute to a certain extent? Physically active, eat better foods, and what else? Don't sit too much. Physically active and sitting is two independent risk factors. Yes?
I read something, a connection between not getting enough sleep and getting obese.
Nice. There is, no, I think it's kind of also the other way around. When you're obese, your sleep quality is poorer. And if you lose weight, there's a possibility that you would sleep better, and you need a certain number of sleeping hours for your metabolism to be normal. So it's actually it works both ways. I guess you're right, but it's much more if you're obese, you don't sleep well. If you don't sleep too much, I don't know exactly what the connection is with obesity, but people who sleep too much are either sick anyway. Like they're trying to tease out some of this in the literature as well. But I know for sure that obesity is associated with poor sleep, with sleep apnea is associated with many metabolic risk factors of cardiac disease and diabetes.
Nancy, can I just jump in for a second? We are actually having a program next Tuesday on that, how what you eat can affect your sleep. So it's in everyone's calendar. It's next Tuesday in this room.
Yes.
I have a problem with my thyroid.
Okay.
I have injury. I never had it from.
So if this is a clinical issue, then I think your doctor would discuss the medical aspect plus the activity and food aspect with you separately, because it's a clinical issue. That it's a lack of thyroid or an excess of thyroid, which they can fix clinically.
I'm taking medication that doesn't seem to do anything.
Yeah, this is not something that's induced by a lack of sleep or.
I've always been active. I have always been active. I've been doing walkabout for over 40 years.
Mhm.
So I've been always active, but still, my metabolism has changed. I don't get hungry.
Thank you. So I think we'll, I'm happy to take a couple questions while Sandy gets prepared, but want to give her enough time to do her piece, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. Any last questions? Any burning questions? Yeah.
So they say that half an hour a day of exercise, at least half an hour a day would be enough. You agree?
Yes, so it depends on what you consider exercise. If you walk at a really slow pace, and if it's not increasing your heart rate, then I'm not sure that you can, you might think you went for a walk, but it has to increase your heart rate. So about half an hour every day is recommended. About 10,000 steps a day are recommended. Or you could do a combination of a few things, yes.